This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the famous Dr. Buck Melton, one of the savants that shines the brightest in our part of the world here. So welcome, Buck.
If I'm one of the savants, then our corner of the world is doomed.
Once again, I noticed a certain sour expression on your face. You're not in the White House. You're still on the, presumably still have our little weekly interchange here.
There's always 2020.
I hope you won't let this disturb your political ambitions, but okay, we'll let them slumber for a while longer. Well, we've had, it's a very tense world out there. We have these conversations on different subjects. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the clash between, you could say, the Christian West and the Islamic East, how that's playing itself out worldwide. We have lots of tensions, major, I guess you'd say, collisions of ideas. And what's the appropriate way to handle this collision, and what caused it? And it would appear this has been going on for 1,500 years or so. In a way, just to continue to set the stage, the tensions that are out there are somewhat like a religious civil war, in that the Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all derive from the same basic concept, a monolithic idea of God, and from the same area. And there's substantial ideas that maybe everyone is trying to worship the same God, which is a big thing to say. So we have a lot of similarities, a lot of issues there, and yet the tension is out there. Maybe it's getting worse. What are your comments on this?
Well, I do think that religion does not seem to be in favor these days. Since the age of the Enlightenment, in the 1600s and the 1700s, you started seeing a deification of reason and a consequent playing down of religion, at least among the, as you say, the savants, the intelligentsia. Everyone from Voltaire and Jefferson down to Bertrand Russell to Marx. And yet there is something that seems deep in the human psyche that keeps on turning to religion. And so as you grind, at least in the United States, religion out of the public forum and the public sphere, you start to ignore something that plays a tremendous role in human behavior. And if you pretend it's not there, you're simply not going to understand human motivations, human drives. And I think that's where we find ourselves. And I think that the media today in America does tend to be somewhat hostile to religion. And so they honestly do not grasp the idea of religious warfare. And so by not grasping it, they misunderstand it. And I think that's part of where we are today, this almost incredulous idea that people will either kill, very willingly kill or die in the name of their religion. And yet they do. I mean, throughout history, they've been willing to do this. People of all religions, or of many religions, I should say. And that's where we find ourselves.
Yes, and we could discuss we had a conversation about religion, and you mentioned enlightenment. One of the things that may sort of set the stage for the Enlightenment are the terrible religious civil wars that took place in the 17th centuries, the 30-Year War, and the sort of breakup of Western Christianity in a way,
yes,
with the Protestant Reformation, the tensions that existed there. That was a very difficult period. And then maybe the the irrationality, it is quite irrational in a way, is that, I mean, it's for people that are really have the same belief system, have on relatively small points, I could question that my comment, but in general, I mean, a visitor from Mars would say, wow, you guys have so much in common, and yet over these doctrinaire issues, you're going to murder millions of people. I mean, you know, this is the way I see it, and you have a different view. I'm just going to burn you at the stake, or kill you, or torture you.
Yes. A perennial favorite in the history of Christianity that's always trotted out is the notorious filioque controversy of the 700s, 800s, 900s. Does the Holy Spirit proceed from God the Father, or does the Holy Spirit proceed from God the Father and God the Son?
Yes.
And it's almost incomprehensible to us today that people would fight and kill and die over this.
Well, I guess what I'm sort of sailing the ship toward is this civil war that took place in the 17th century. The Enlightenment came out of it.
Yes.
It's rather complicated kind of events, but in a way, the great power of the West arose from the idea of rationality, scientific inquiry, and they became secularized to a great degree. And it's a very complicated arrangement, but the idea of engineering schools, scientific inquiry, would not be the same as what a university education would have been in the 12th century, where there'd be a lot of focus on theology. So becoming a more secular society, the West got this great power. I'll sail the ship in that direction.
Yes.
There might be some questioning about it.
No,
but in any event,
they
they have the secular power. They're becoming progressively more secular. So the dynamics that are out there today is and we can discuss it, Islam, which is very complicated, and it may well be we don't understand it enough, but the scientific inquiry rationality is sort of a Western adjunct to their basic viewpoint. I mean, if I could phrase it that way. So they've missed a lot of what happened over the past several centuries in the Christian West, and now the tension is between, some people would call this post-Christian West, and sort of a rebounding Islamic world, from rebounding for population, living ill at ease with the West, and feeling slighted by a lot of the power of the West and the knowledge of what life is like in the West. And these tensions seem part of our global community getting closer and closer together. So what I'm sort of getting into is, how do you diminish tensions? What's causing the tensions? And is some of the tension the secular part of the West? In other words, if it were an arch Christian country with presumably a different sort of moral standard out there, would that be a more acceptable companion to the Islamic East?
Well, I'm not sure, and I do have to, I think, modify some of the things you said. During the so-called Dark Ages in Western Europe of the 500s, the 600s, and the 700s, there was still learning going on, and I'm not sure you'd call it modern science, but learning going on in the Islamic world.
Of course.
And a lot of this learning was advanced over Western Christianity. We got a lot of our ideas from Islam by the time of the Renaissance and the revival of learning and knowledge in the West. And I think that the scientific method actually began in the church and in the early cathedral schools. I think, and maybe I'm splitting hairs here, now eventually the scientific method got divorced from religion. And it would be interesting for us to have a TV show one night on at what point did this tremendous hostility between science and religion develop. I mean, is the hostility inherent, or is it being overhyped? But I do think what you see now is that the West prides itself on its sense of science and on its sense of rationality, and the typical idea of ISIS is that it is irrational, fundamentally irrational. And that's certainly not the case. I mean, if you look at Turkey, I mean, it's a modern, tolerant, somewhat liberal, or has been, Islamic country, which kind of explodes our stereotypes, if you will, of the irrational Muslim screaming Allahu Akbar and waving a sword.
Well, of course, I mean, of course that stereotype is incorrect, but I'll just make a few comments. Well, yes, the evolution of learning in the world, I mean, it goes through stages, and there's no question that after the destruction of the library at Alexandria, the whole deal, I mean, okay, whatever classical learning slumbered, and it was preserved. No question it was preserved by the church, by monasteries, etc., and they were custodians of it. All the universities arose out of that. I mean, I'll certainly take that as a point. I'm sort of saying that the situation evolved in later centuries, and okay, it's slightly different. In regards to the Islamic learning, which I think is not enough attention paid to, I think it's fair enough that some of the observers really preserved classical learning. I mean, particularly in Spain, they did great jobs. Baghdad in 900 AD was extraordinary. The whole deal with the Persian arrangements, they're great centers of culture, etc.
The preservation of Aristotelian knowledge.
Right, but to take the step, which was a substantial thing about observation, experimentation, the Cox postulates, the whole way that you could prove or disprove things, the idea of free interchange, wherever the free interchange took place, is, I think, more in the West.
Western,
and I would say that the Islamic world had, and of course, I mean, I'm sure people that are more knowledgeable would beat me up on these issues, but okay, if you're out there, please do. They send me a letter. But the takeaway message is there's sort of a theocracy in many ways, and the whole deal about the responsibility of the ruler to Islam and the rules that Islam lays down are very prescriptive in many ways. Maybe much more prescriptive for a good Islamic person than someone in the West. You've got to do this, you've got to do that, and many great, wonderful people, come out of that, and they're not limited in any shape of the world as they go along. But there's some fundamental differences there.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, and I'm going to make a comment about it.
I would like just a quick thing. One of my favorite Facebook memes is, you're a real historian if you are still upset about the burning of the library at Alexandria. So,
okay, I still am. Is that,
so you're part of the club then.
It's too bad we did that.
Yes. And I would, the idea of Islam being a prescriptive religion, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think Eastern Orthodoxy, if you're really trying to live the Eastern Orthodox faith, it's pretty prescriptive.
Yes.
Catholicism, of course, has gutted itself, and unjustly so.
I hope you don't
about
make
50
any
years
comment
ago.
About Methodism
So,
now. Which is, I make a little joke here about, I'm a Methodist, but it is a pretty open arm kind of place. It's pretty welcoming, everyone, pretty generous.
What is that line? And a river runs through it. Methodists are just Baptists who can read. And I say that as a descendant of a long line of Baptists.
Me too.
I say that
it's hard not to be Baptist, at least some way in this part of the world. Yes.
But and I think it's interesting, going back to something you said a while back, is that Islam, Judaism, or I should supposedly say Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in chronological order are the Abrahamic religions. I mean, they are all related. They all trace their way ultimately to Jerusalem as a crucially important city, the Dome of the Rock, the Temple, the Crucifixion. And yet, there has been warfare amongst them from the very beginning.
Yes.
And it's fascinating. I do think that of the three, and perhaps of all of the world's greatest religions, Islam is the most testosterone-driven. It is the most patriarchal. I think the farther east you go, the more matriarchal you get, and maybe the matriarchy establishes a moderating influence on the destructive tendency of the male ape.
Yes.
And so that's a problem that we face. Now, that's not to say that Christianity or Judaism are not patriarchal. Take, for instance, the role of the Virgin Mary, especially in Catholicism or in Eastern Orthodoxy. That's a huge moderating influence, but you still have an all-male priesthood, for instance. And so there's plenty of testosterone to go around. But testosterone, of course, means conflict, and that conflict has been there since the beginning.
Yes. Well, we could really sail into the gender politics of the world, but I'm going to display my great wisdom by sort of directing this. We could talk about it another time. I think it is. I'm making a joke. It's an issue of substantial consequence. Making a little joke, but one of the things I think that's a problem in the Christian West, the secular West, is just not understanding enough about Islam.
True.
It's what's going on, and a lot of the people that where these extreme events take place, there are all kinds of nuances in the Islamic world, I think, all kinds of nuances, and there are all kinds of Islamic people out there. And I mean, there are different shades of it, and it's kind of like some people are Methodist, you could say Methodist Islamic people, and there are some people that are very severe fundamentalist Islamic people that are really are tense and really have substantially strong views. And if you do read the Quran, which relatively few people do, there are sections in it that are like Leviticus on steroids. I mean, there really are powerful statements in there. There's a great deal of beauty and justice, and I mean, there's no doubt about it in the Islamic religion. And I don't want to be in any way demeaning of it. It's a very great thing. It's a wonderful thing for the world. But just how to get everybody to get along. And one of the things is just to understand the situation more. Of the Islamic people, for instance, in the U.S., they're all, I mean, almost everybody I've known ever, just been as nice as they could be. Anybody that has, what a great virtue to have the people here. And that's true everywhere. I mean, particularly the people that are immigrants, they have a set of values when they enter a new society that are very welcome to that society, and the Islamic people that have come here have made great contributions, etc. And so one has to examine why some of these conflicts that are taking place, and a lot of it is, I think, with disenchanted young males that are in the West or entering the Western world. And they've had, I'm making all generalizations are odious, but I'm making some general comments that there is a type of learning in Islam that's quite non-secular, and it's theological studies of the Quran and the wisdom of the Prophet, and there's a whole cadre of different values and great wisdom, and so many people have imbibed that, and not so much, shall we say, sociology. I mean, not so much social, but a lot of that. And then entering into the West, I mean, the secular West must appear to be extremely sinful to these young men.
Well, and it's how we present ourselves. Does Hollywood truly give an accurate representation of what most Americans believe and how most Americans think and feel and act? Well, I think more so today than ever before, but even so, is it really truly accurate? And yet, what do people in the Middle East know of America? They probably
or in the world, as far as
they know Hollywood, they know American pop music. So maybe they are proceeding from misperception of the United States as well.
And they get, I mean, I would say this, the extreme statements that sometimes appear from a politician or any kind of extreme events get tremendous publicity overseas. So their knowledge of, I would say, the good heart of America is not so obvious. I mean, having traveled a little bit myself, there's something that's special about America. And it's sort of the third covenant kind of thing, blundering as it does. The idea it really has a moral mission that influences its behavior that other countries might not. They may have a different moral mission, but they have some other ideas about how they comport themselves.
Well, look at Woodrow Wilson's war message, which is almost exactly a century ago, early April of 1917. And for all of Wilson's failings, and I would say his intolerance and his naivete, look at the war message, the idea of the world must be made safe for democracy, the idea of the New World Order. This is what Americans think of themselves, American exceptionalism. But might that even come across as a threat to others? I remember that after September 11th, when George W. Bush made a speech to Congress, and he said we must engage in a crusade against Islamic terrorism. That's the wrong word to use in regard to Islam, because that
Crusade
taps into so much.
Oh yes, and the idea of like murder, whatever, taking back the land, fights. That's right. Crusade is a bad word, and as a matter of fact, it's pretty much banned. I mean, you could think about Dwight D. Eisenhower's crusade in Europe. The whole deal has had that particular word was well regarded in the West, and I think just as you mentioned, that some of for better or worse, that word has been censored.
Yes.
So
yes.
a politician would be very cautious about talking about crusades, although for 1,000 years that it was a gold coin, and the Western.
It's like the swastika. The swastika was a wonderful,
it's a good luck
ubiquitous thing until
right,
there was there was an amateur baseball team up in Oregon, I think, something like the Portland Swastikas.
Seriously?
As late as the 1920s.
Really?
Yeah, and
was
there was
thought to be
no
a-
odium attached to it at all. So.
Well,
Yes.
well. Obviously, that's some of the things that are taking place. Well, I
Yes.
want to push a little bit about what's the solution to this world conflict, and it's understanding. It appears to me just getting an idea about what's up. And I think one of the things that's not considered enough is the wealth disparities, the wealth and power disparities between many people that are in the Islamic world and then the prosperity of the West. And looking at the wealth distribution in the world, there are very wealthy Islamic countries, and there are wealthy princes made great by their oil revenue. But for most people, it's a pretty terrible situation. And it's true enough, I think Islam promotes charity, and still the economic arrangements are rough.
Yes.
And that's going to cause tension, a big-time tension.
Yes. And when you have tension, and it's the empty stomach theory, empty stomachs make people angry. If you've got these disaffected young males, and if Islam is as patriarchal as I suggest it is, who are the most testosterone-driven members of any society? Young, slightly post-adolescent males. So you're taking the most testosterone-driven group of the most potentially testosterone-driven religion. You're giving them a mission that is contrary to what we think of as now traditional Western values that have been absorbed by most of the world to some degree. And this puts them in fundamental opposition to it. So what do you get? Look at the origins of Islam. Now, and I'd like to preface my statements by saying I think every world religion, every major world religion has got some major black marks against it. And Christianity is no different. The Inquisitions, the persecutions. But I think that the black marks that Christianity earned came after it had established itself, after it had essentially gained monolithic, hegemonic control of Western Europe. It was then that you saw the dark side of Christianity erupt. With Islam, it's a little bit different. It actually spread to a large degree across North Africa and into Europe by military conquest from the beginning. So it was an us versus them mentality, and let's attack. And so are we not setting up the same sort of model today? You've got this decadent, westernized culture, Hollywood culture, pop music culture, secular culture, and these radical imams are giving these radicalized youth a mission to go out and do to this culture what the original Muslims did.
Yes. So, I mean, well, it might be a little bit too charitable toward Christianity to say force was never used. I mean, I'm thinking about Charlemagne killing all the Saxons. I mean, if you know the story, I'm sure you do. You know, the idea is he's fighting with the Saxons, and they were worshippers of Wotan and sundry Thor, Wotan, whatever the gang was, and they were backsliders. And
but
so
this was this is after Charlemagne already had control of his own power base. So.
Well, that's right. But they were moving into Saxon, and there was sort of a new area to go into, and you have to be a Christian to be in my kingdom, and I know you're not. Well, he cut off, I don't know, 10,000 heads. I mean, there are things like that took place.
Yes.
So it's no one is particularly immune to events like that.
Indeed.
But right now, the idea, I guess we get into the idea of force and fear as a determining factor on the belief systems.
Yes.
So if you're in a country where, well, I mean, it's dangerous to be a Christian in some countries in the Islamic world. I mean, they're going to blow you up and kill you. The Coptic, Coptic religion in Egypt, about 10% of the population is Coptic.
Yes.
Palm Sunday, they tried to, presumably the Islamic Brotherhood tried to kill people like that. It is pretty unusual right now. Can we think of a situation where Christians tried to kill non-believers? I mean, in this century, I mean, can you think of one? I mean, it's extremely unusual that, I mean, well, I guess maybe in Canada they do something, people deface the mosque. I mean, I guess some things happen, but not.
They tend to be, they
killing
tend
people is another matter. I mean.
Yes, certainly intimidation, but these are carried out by small groups.
But even killing, killing
yeah.
people for not being Christian is pretty
Yes.
unusual.
Well, certainly really not in the Western world. I mean, if it has happened, it has certainly not been
for a
covered
long
very
time.
thoroughly.
For a long time,
So.
I mean, maybe, but of course the question is the media suppressing our knowledge of what could be happening? I mean, I somewhat doubt it with the internet.
I would suspect
can't.
not.
I think
So.
the words. The internet is getting the story out there pretty much. It's not really censorable. I mean, you can't censor it very well,
Yes.
can
So what is it? What is it in the makeup of Islam? I mean, I think we're talking sociology here, and I'm contending it may be the testosterone. So it's the best example, best explanation that I can come up with. But
well, I mean, just make these comments. I mean, in general, the incidents that, let's say, something has happened, a shooting in America, something like that, is extremely unusual for the Islamic people to do anything that's overt. It's very, very unusual.
yes,
I mean, it happens rarely, and if you look at the number of people, say, killed in automobile accidents, it's a far bigger number. So in
Yes,
general, it appears to me the situation is working out, but we still have this big tension out there, and I'm not sure how that's resolved other than maybe Islam becomes more secular. Maybe there's just, you could say, maybe the Catholic Church and Protestant churches have become, in a way, more secular, more forgiving, more let's all live together kind of.
Well, this is interesting because I just had in my mind when you mentioned that when John F. Kennedy was running for president, and of course very rarely had Catholics run for president at that point, and somebody asked Kennedy what role would he be, and he says, "I'm an American who happens to be Catholic."
Yes.
He didn't say, "I'm a Catholic who happens to be American." What is it about the American experience, the secularizing influence? So
Yes.
if it can do it to a Catholic or a Protestant, why not a Shia or a Sunni?
Yes. Well, our century, we've discussed some of the dangers of our century, and obviously these terrible possible religious disputes, could really destabilize the whole planet. We have to hope that will not happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have to, either war is finished or we are, as
Yes.
Pug Henry once wrote
Yes.
in Winds of War.
And on that note, thank you
Thank you
once again for being with us tonight, Bucky. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.